Good afternoon. In my last video, I failed to mention that it was my second episode of PostCult Worldview, and that would make this the third episode of PostCult Worldview. Maybe I should call it PCW. PCW Episode 3. I don't know, I gotta get better at introducing these videos. At any rate, in the last video, I talked about the terms atheist and theist and some of the nuances around those categories. Before I move into agnostic, deist, pantheist, and other topics, I want to address two issues. One is why I'm not a theist. The other is why I'm not an atheist. This video is going to be the first one, why I'm not a theist. So just to recap, a theist is somebody who believes in a personal God, a God who is human-like, with similar thoughts and emotions, somebody who plans, and this God has a chosen religion on earth and has composed or inspired a specific holy book, and he is interested in what is happening on the planet right now and answers prayers, so forth. That's the kind of God that a theist believes in. So why does that not describe me? Well, there are a number of reasons that I've come to over the last couple years, but I'm only going to focus on two primary reasons that I consider to be foundational reasons, because they were instrumental in me leaving the Jehovah's Witness organization. So they're pretty core to my being. And after leaving the organization, I realized that they were reasons for leaving that organization, but they also stand as reasons for not being a theist. And so I'm just being consistent. The first reason has to do with falsification. The Bible makes many claims, and I should say here that this video is going to focus primarily on the Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. There are other kinds of theism that I probably will talk about more in the future, but for the time being, that's what I'm really talking about here, that kind of theism, Abrahamic-based theism. So, the Bible makes many claims that are fantastic and miraculous, and many of them are unfalsifiable, meaning if they did happen, they would have left no evidence for us to study, so we can't say with 100% certainty that they didn't happen. However, there are claims in the Bible that are falsifiable, and I'm going to give 4 examples, all of which are from the book of Genesis. One, and this is probably the weakest of the 4, is the story of Babel, and the claim that the reason we have the different languages that we have now are due to the fact that God confused the languages at the Tower of Babel. We know how languages formed. It's something that we can actually study today. And at the time that the Bible was written, they didn't know all that stuff. And so it seems clear to me that this is a fable. This is a fable of kind of like how the leopard got its spots. This is a fable for why are there so many different languages and cultures. Like I said, that's the weakest of the 4. The next one I'll mention would be the claim that all life on the planet was created directly and specifically by God according to its kind, which denies evolution by common descent and speciation through natural selection. The third one, and I feel that this is the strongest one, is the claim that there was a cataclysmic global flood that killed every single human on the planet with the exception of one family of 8, and that the only reason that there are still animals living on the planet is that they were preserved on the ark. This is an incredibly extraordinary claim about something that would have left so much evidence on the planet that was undeniable. And we can look for that evidence and see that it's lacking and find a stunning amount of evidence that shows that it could not have happened. We can look at core samples of ice at the poles, for example. We can ask the question of how did all the animals in Australia get from the Middle East to Australia? We can ask if there are saltwater fish and freshwater fish, how in the world did they survive the flood? There's no mention of aquariums on the ark, and saltwater fish can't live in a half salty brine, and freshwater fish can't live in a half salty brine. So if you take all the water in the world and mix it together, all the fish would have died. Now, of course, if you're a strong believer, you could just say, well, God miraculously kept them alive. At that point, it's hard for me to have a conversation, because you're not willing to have a conversation based in any kind of reality that we can observe. I'm only scratching the surface here of all the problems with the flood. You know, the pyramids would have been destroyed. We would see it in genetic evidence. You know, animals, if they have only been evolving according to their kind, if you want to say, since the flood, and they've been reproducing since the flood, we would be able to see evidence of that in the DNA. The profound amount of incest that would have been going on, there'd be proof of that in the DNA. I recommend going to jwfacts.com and looking at the page on the flood. When I read that page, that was the first page that I read, the first kind of apostate page that I read in its entirety, and it was like this huge weight was lifted off my chest, because I always knew the flood didn't make sense, at least for the 12 years prior to that, and to see how much it didn't make sense and be able to just admit that to myself was, I can't even explain how good that felt. Like scales falling from my eyes, a weight taken off my back. I can't imagine ever going back to believing that again, that there was a global cataclysmic flood. Wow, I really ranted a lot about that. Clearly it's an important issue to me. But in terms of theism, my fourth point is more important doctrinally, and that is the question of how long have humans been on the earth. According to the Bible, humans have been on the earth 6,000 years, and Adam and Eve were literal people, the literal first man and woman. This is not what science shows. Humans have been on the planet for hundreds of thousands of years, and I'm talking modern humans. And if we're even super, super conservative, it's still at least 50,000 years. So Adam and Eve weren't real people, I'm sorry, if we're going to accept science. Now, is it possible that God somehow planted a bunch of false evidence on the planet to mislead us? Again, if you're willing to take it to that extent, I don't know how to have a conversation with you. At the very least, that makes God a trickster. You know, if he miraculously kept the fish alive through the flood, just so it would be nearly impossible to believe the flood happened in a rational age, that is a trickster God. That is a God who wants us to believe things on credulity that contradict reason. And I can't accept that that kind of God is loving. Now this fourth category, again, is very important for Christianity. And I'll get to that again in a second. Now, I'm not going to get into all the apologetics and counter-apologetics for these issues that Christianity will use. However, I will just mention two basic reactions. One reaction is to uphold outliers like Ken Ham, who is he's the creator of Answers in Genesis, that website. And this website is made up of articles that are pseudoscientific. And what pseudoscientific means is that it has all the trappings of science. It has scientific words. It has quotations from scientists. It has footnotes and references. And if you just read it in isolation, it sounds rock solid. It sounds like good science. The reason it's not science and is in fact pseudoscience is that it contradicts all established science. Many different disciplines, paleontology, archaeology, geology, you know, established science will be harmonious between disciplines, whereas pseudoscience will come in and make an assertion that contradicts all of those and therefore isn't really science. So that's one avenue, is to uphold pseudoscience, essentially. The other way is to say, yes, we know that humans have been on the earth for hundreds of thousands of years. Yes, evolution is a fact. Speciation did happen. We have the fossil record. We have DNA evidence. But the Bible is still metaphorically true, and Jesus still is my personal Savior. And He is the reason that I have salvation. Now, I appreciate the effort to not be anti-science there. However, it's not consistent. And in a way, I have a lot of respect for fundamentalists who recognize that and say, if I'm going to accept Jesus, I have to accept the Genesis story too. Because of this issue of Adam and Eve, like I said, being that being the most important doctrinal problem here. If Adam and Eve weren't real people, then sin didn't enter the world in Eden. And there is no original sin. And without original sin, why do you need a sacrifice to redeem us from this inherited sin? Without Adam and Eve, there's no need for Jesus because of a literal original sin. Now, I'll just say here that I do know there are progressive Christians out there who don't even believe that original sin as presented by, you know, for example, Paul, is a literal, real thing, that we're like broken from the womb. That we can look at Jesus and be a disciple of Jesus and not be judgmental and be inclusive and accepting in the way that Jesus was, and follow the path of Jesus of caring for those who need to be cared for. You know, listening to his parables, like of the Good Samaritan, and really learning from that and thinking about what it means. This is the kind of Christian I appreciate. I don't necessarily identify as that kind of Christian, but I do see a lot of beauty in the character of Jesus. And I can even get my head around Jesus being the way, you know, that we can die to our former course and be reborn as something better. I mean, I think that's something that all former Jehovah's Witnesses can relate to. That it's almost like the phoenix, you know, burning and rising from the ashes. You know, that's the Christ story. That's that journey. We can all rise above. So I see great things in aspects of Christianity, but I do not identify as a theistic Christian. Now, I've ran on for almost 15 minutes already. I wanted this to be short, so I'll have to convey my second reason for not being a theist a little more concisely. And this has to do with the issue of religious exclusivism. As a Jehovah's Witness, long before I had any of these tangible doubts about, you know, creationism and the flood, this idea that only Jehovah's Witnesses would be saved never sat right with me. That only 8 million out of 8 billion people were acceptable to God. And as I was leaving the organization, it felt good to shed that idea. And as I was reading Crisis of Conscience, you know, which is told from a Christian perspective, I was thinking, you know, maybe I still could hold on to some version of Christianity. But when it comes down to it, Christianity, like Islam, is a exclusive or universal religion, which is to say this religion represents the truth of the cosmos. It applies to all people on the planet, and if you don't agree with it and take on this belief system as your own, you are now either damned to hell, you are going to experience eternal destruction, or at the very least, you don't get to be among the elect that God prefers. I find this idea to be fundamentally distasteful, even with Christianity. You know, Christianity is the largest world religion. It's 1/3 of the world population. And even if we're super liberal and say that all people that claim to be Christian are good with God, we're still throwing 2/3 of the world population under the bus. And this includes people who will never encounter Christianity. This includes people who have been told that Christians should not be trusted their whole life. They have no reason to explore this religion. I'm sorry, I will not cast those people aside. All people on this planet are my brothers and sisters. I have the same value for them regardless of what their belief system is. And if there is something that could be called God, I believe that God would feel the same way. You know, that's a big claim there. I probably could spark a lot of debate just around making such a statement. But that's how I feel. I feel fundamental love for all mankind, and I will not judge them as different because they've been indoctrinated differently than somebody else. So those are my two main reasons for not being theist. With that said, I love everybody who's watching this video, whether you're a theist or not. Go ahead and comment below and let me know what are your reasons for being a theist or for not being a theist. Thanks for watching. I will catch you again soon, and in the next one I'll explain why I am not an atheist. Take care.